We have some more PTR changes for today. This time around, though, they don't affect the specs or the classes, but now we are talking about dungeons, and specifically Mythic Plus dungeons to be added in the next season of Mythic Plus, two of which we are already dealing with right now, Priory and Floodgate, and two of which we voted ourselves from Season 1 to be reintroduced in Season 3, Ara Kara and Dawnbreaker, and the majority of these changes are very positive. In particular, most of these are very positive for tanks, actually, in these 4 dungeons. First in line is Ara Kara. The first of the good changes for Ara Kara is a slight one, but it can still be very helpful. It's the Thrilling Attendant change of its Web Bolt and its Resonant Barrage. The Thrilling Attendant right now is, the annoying one where you start going down here and you run all the way to the boss, basically dragging around these mobs following you, and these guys are often left behind, as you go to the boss because they keep casting their abilities. QoL now is that if you turn both of its abilities into a single school of magic, if you silence the mob won't be able to cast either. He's casting Web Bolt, you silence the boss, you interrupt the boss from that school, so he just stops casting that school of magic and moves over to the Resonant Barrage cast, the AoE one. Now though, that they are the same school of magic, if you interrupt and silence that school of magic, he won't have anything to cast. So now he can just actually move along the tank, move along the rest of the mobs towards the mini bosses, for example, with this school of magic change in Ara Kara. The other ones are very good for tanks, and we move past the first part of Ara Kara and we now move into the second one. And this one is the tank help of the Bloodstained Assistant, especially the left side of the pools. If you even went left, actually, it was very dangerous to go this side, especially for this pool right here, because of these ones casting Extraction Strike. This was very dangerous on tanks, and it was very, very risky to get one-shot by these abilities, often stacking on top of each other from these mobs altogether. Now they won't cast this immediately as they enter combat, so they will leave the tank some room to actually, for example, group up the pack together before having to deal with this, even though, as mentioned, generally speaking, you went right in Ara Kara, you didn't go left, and even if you went left, you actually weren't really planning on pulling this pack. What is even better for tanks, actually, is this one, which you did have to deal with the drones in the last part of Ara Kara, the reinforced drones. Now they no longer cast Grasping Slash. This was the reasonable damage on the tank plus the slow, and the slow was stackable. This was very annoying because, of course, when you went here, you pulled a bunch of these, you had to gather the Blood Overseers, which are the ones that do the circles you have to dodge, and now you have the circles on the ground, you have to dodge, but the tank is moving with a 95% slow on himself because he keeps getting stacks of this slow from these drones. Now it's gonna be trivial basically to just deal with these packs without having to worry about the perma slow of these drones put on the tank. The last biggest change of all of Ara Kara is the last boss, because the last boss, for starters, is now only going to target 3 players with the poison instead of 5. That's already the first good one. And then, on top of this, a help against one-shots, a help against tiny little mistakes, which is the mistake of getting hit by the wave, by the poison wave spawned by this mechanic. Now it's doing 50% less damage, but now you have that 50% damage that has been reduced into a dot, 5-second dot after getting hit. This is very good because it's, if you can spread the damage over time, even for one-shot abilities, take only 60% of the damage to be instant and move 40% of the damage into a dot. It gives you more time to react to it, more time for the healer to react to it. The damage is the same. The damage taken is the same, but it's over time and it makes it easier to deal with it. On top of this, last one, Cosmic Singularity, so the pulling, the sacking, right, has its initial damage reduced by 50%. So across the board, very good changes for Ara Kara. Better grouping of mobs in the first part, less tank damage in the second part, even though you weren't going this side anyways, and then better managing of the adds on the tank, as well as the last boss being nerfed in Ara Kara. The next of the dungeons being changed is the Dawnbreaker. Now here we have to pretty much trust Blizzard, because besides what Blizzard tells us of the Speaker Shadow Crown having his Obsidian Beam initial damage reduced by 33%, which is cool, you know, the first boss beam damage that when it spawns reduced, fine, whatever, or the Manifested Shadow no longer casting Dark Flows, or the Nightfall Shadow Walker no longer doing shadow damage with Umbral Rush. What is the more relevant part about the whole dungeon is the Blizzard note saying improved many spells in the dungeon and made adjustments to mitigate burst damage on tanks throughout the instance. So we haven't actually gotten the list of all of the things that have been changed to mitigate the burst damage on tanks throughout the instance, but that's what Blizzard is telling us about the Dawnbreaker. So we will have to trust Blizzard, or maybe come up with a compiled list of all things that have been changed once we have enough testing on the dungeon, now that the Mythic Plus testing has gone live a few hours ago. So that's what has been announced for Dawnbreaker. The largest amount of changes for a dungeon went to the Priory, and also pretty much almost all of them here in this zone. The only change in this zone is the change to these guys right here, the life spawns. It's not what players wanted, but it's kind of there. The change now is that life spawns can no longer target the same player with their Beam of Death, with Purification. Now the best solution would have been to basically put a debuff, a safe space for players targeted by life spawn to not be able to be targeted again within the next like 10 seconds or something, right? But even now, just not allowing both life spawns to target the same player with Purification is very good, because it was almost a death sentence minus some very powerful CDs, externals, defensives, or immunities in this part of Priory. But all the other changes pretty much are in this zone right here. And also most of these are centered around giving you more room to choose if you want to go left and deal with this, or if you want to go right and deal with this. That's the main choice. So first one was the decision to nerf the Knight, which is a patrolling mob here. It's particularly undodgeable on this side, while you can easily go around the Knight on the right side. So the Knight gets nerfed in its more annoying part, which is Impale. Impale has a 33% shorter duration and has 25% less initial damage. This was very, very, very dangerous, because on top of the AoE shout it was doing, in the background Impale was actually ticking like crazy and making it also very difficult to keep that player up in HP before the shout of the Knight, causing this one-hit combo that would kill the players. Now Impale has been nerfed. Then you have a whole set of nerfs to the mini bosses. The biggest one that tanks will be happy about is Suleiman, because this one gets a 33% nerf on its shield slam for the tank, and on top of that the shield slam is now blockable. So very good for Prot Paladin, excellent for Prot Warriors. Now this is much more manageable for these two tanks, and also the other tanks in general, for the shield slam being nerfed. Now as for the mini bosses, you have the High Priest pretty much untouched. She's not actually getting anything. You have Damien right to the right, pretty much very often dodged by players, who gets 15% HP nerf and the heat wave initial damage reduced by 30%, and now deals that damage over time. And then you have Dual Mal himself, one of the ones you can call basically by defeating the mini bosses that are gonna come to fight you. Finally, this guy will no longer cast Cinder Blast, and now Cinderstorm has its duration reduced from 6 to 4 seconds. One of the problems of this guy, in the question of should we keep this one alive when fighting the boss, is that the boss was going to do his mauling, his savage mauling, and then this guy was going to do his Cinderstorm. So now you have a player pinned on the ground by the savage mauling, while some circles, some one-shot circles are spawning, and you can't move. And if you get hit by that, you die. It was very annoying. So now, instead, you have the change of Capitan Delcry, which even if you do pull them together now, if you go, for example, right side, and you get to pull a Dual Mal together with the boss, now Savage Mauling and Cinderstorm can't be cast within 8 seconds of each other. You do have the grace period to stop this one shot from happening, which makes it now more acceptable to go right side and deal with this combination. The other one, another very good positive change for tanks, it's piercing, spear, armor reduction, penetration for tanks goes from 10 seconds long to 7 seconds long. Less risky damage taken, and constant despair of tanks trying to find extra defensives to use they don't have because they have used them all when trying to deal with this boss. This is another very positive change for Priory, again mostly focused around tanks. This one is now easier to tank, the boss itself is now also easier to tank, and then more importantly the Impale nerf for knights. All this together to try to give you a better choice to either go left or to go right, to make them both viable in the next season. The last of the changes goes to Floodgate. So Blizzard doesn't like how players stopped actually fighting this side, and with different displays of trickery, like you pull up to here, then you move here with Mind Suit, and then a Vengeance Demon Hunter goes in here, picks this up, Shadow Melts, drops aggro, and allows you to just activate this thing without actually fighting the actual pack over here. It's being changed. Blizzard is adjusting the composition of the pack guarding the weapon stockpile right next to Big Mama to make them surround basically the stockpile and make it impossible now to enable this skipping the actual pack. Another thing, talking about skipping, that is being done in Floodgate is Blizzard also didn't like how we had this entire meta basically around skipping bubbles. Blizzard wants you to kill bubbles. They're saying that they are adjusting the location of bubbles, which I believe it was that now bubbles moves here, which I believe it makes it impossible to skip, because if it's here, you can pull him here and run over here, but if it's now here, if the tank pulls it back, you have no room to go because you're going to be aggroing any of these sides. Basically, it's an attempt to make you actually fight bubbles. We will likely still find an even more degenerate way to skip this mob in high keys, but we will see if this one will be enough to deal with this fish, frog, whatever that mutated animal is. You have though other changes in Floodgate. You have, for starters, the Electro Crush, more tank health. Electro Crush initial damage has been reduced by 20%. Okay, and then you have help for the transition of the normal phase into the big burst, where now there is a 5-second wind up grace period before Big Mama enters her AoE phase in her fight. Now, this is a good charity change for all of the blind melee DPS who get one shot by the loader bots. You know, it's a big pool, there's a bunch of mobs, they can't quite tell the nameplates apart, they don't realize these guys have started spinning, and they die. So, the change of Blizzard is that now the wind-up damage of the loader bots deals 25% less damage, but also now their cast, their initial turning into a Beyblade cast is 100% longer, so you have twice as much time to realize you have to get out of the way from these guys spinning, essentially. That's the other change in Floodgate. The last one is apparently, I'm not sure what they meant with that, we'll have to see, that now the architects spawn their scaffolding in a more consistent location, whatever that means. But in general, you can see that across all 4 of the touched dungeons, the primary focus initially has been on making the life easier on tanks. Pretty much all 4 consistently had some set of changes to reduce the damage taken by tanks. Then you had some minor QoLs here and there in pathing, for example, making it simpler in Ara Kara to group mobs together to stop this attendant from sticking in the back and continuing to cast, which is very annoying, or the pathing in Priory, being able to go left or right. These have been some positive changes in the PTR right now for Season 3, but the focus was definitely the smoothing of the tank damage right now, as for the changes to these 4 dungeons. So, these 4 dungeons, of course, also being testable in the PTR pretty much for the next week, so you can go and test these dungeons yourself as soon as the servers are up again, of course. For this though, on this Thursday, we are now done highlighting what has been changing in the Mythic Plus for the next season. So, we can start to say our goodbyes. We're starting as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, finally, we are supposed to have 2 to 3 days of barely even 30 degrees afternoons, which is a good change for a while.